Hi, my name is Aya. You're watching Aya Reads, and I'm here to talk about my worst books I read in 2024. So before I get started, these are the books that I read that just didn't work for me for some reason. I obviously will go in depth with each and every book. Please don't take offense if you loved any of these books. I'm obviously not talking about you or your reading taste. It's just these books that didn't work for me. Also, if any of the authors somehow stumble upon this video, please click off because usually most of my videos tend to be more positive, and this is one of the few videos that I do that is more negative, and this is really not for you. So do yourself a favor and leave. Yeah, I think those are my thoughts. Also, some of these authors have written some of my favorite books of all time, so just because I didn't like this particular book doesn't mean I hate the author or don't think they can write well. So with that out of the way, let's get started. I actually have 6 books that I completely finished and hated. And then there are 6 books that I DNF'd because I just could not get into them. With those DNFs, obviously, I didn't completely finish the book, so I cannot say for sure, but I think I've read enough to know that I probably wouldn't like it, and it probably would have ended up in my worst books of the year anyway. I think with the books I finished, all of them I gave 2 stars. I want to start with a book that really, not only is it my worst books, but it completely disappointed me, and it's Not in Love by Ali Hazelwood. The reason this was such a giant disappointment is I have given, previous to this book, I had given every single Ali Hazelwood book I read 5 stars. In fact, last year, Love theoretically made it onto my best books of the year. So I had pretty high hopes for this one, especially hearing that it was an erotic romance. As much as I loved Ali Hazelwood, I always thought that, you know, I like smutty books, so I thought, okay, what? Ali Hazelwood plus it being a little bit smuttier, say less. I just thought that I was gonna love it, and maybe that's my fault for having such high expectations, but I felt like it was deserved considering of the 3 books I read previously, all of them had been 5 stars. So this one just didn't work. I thought the female character was completely unlikable, and that would have been fine, except Eli was completely obsessed with her for some reason, and I just didn't understand why. There was such a giant imbalance in this book. Like, I'm not joking. This is not really hyperbole when I tell you that he would have given her the shirt off his back, yet she probably wouldn't have even given him her shirt if she had been wearing 10 shirts. Like, that is how imbalanced it was. Basically, you follow Eli and Rue, and the book starts off with them meeting up to basically have a hookup through this dating app, but they get interrupted, and he drives her home, and honestly, that is what I'm talking about with imbalance. He almost has to give up his social security number for him to drive her home. Which, I mean, at that point, that was fine because she really did not know him, and the whole point of meeting at a hotel was so that he wouldn't know where she lived. And then the next day, she comes to work, and she works for this, she's a biotech engineer at which is a promising startup in the field of food science, and she meets him there, and it turns out his company is trying to buy out her company. So technically they are on opposite sides of this acquisition, I guess, but they are attracted to each other. So they eventually decide to just be like co-workers with benefits, but he falls fast and falls hard, and she, honestly, at the end of the day, I wasn't convinced that she loved him at all. In fact, I wasn't even convinced that she liked him. It's basically their romance. This, to me, it wasn't just the romance that I hated. It was also the plot. I felt like she recycled the plot of Love theoretically, and I'm just gonna leave it at that. So it wasn't even a surprise. Like, I wasn't reading this for the romance, nor was I reading it for the plot, because I already knew what was gonna happen. I vlogged my reading experience, which I'll leave that vlog linked for you, so if you want more of my in-depth thoughts and my genuine reactions when I first read it, I'll leave it linked for you, but this was just not for me. I really hope this is a one-off, because I am still very much looking forward to Deep End, which comes out beginning of next year, but this was not it. And I honestly, I don't think I'm the only one, because comparing it to her other book, this doesn't have the highest ratings. The next book I want to talk about is One Hot Italian Summer by Karina Halley. So this sucks because this was my first Karina Halley, and there are a lot of her books on my TBR, so hopefully this was also a one-off. You follow, I don't know her name. No, you follow this writer from Scotland, I'm pretty sure, who has been in a giant writing slump ever since her co-writer died. So her agent tells her, you know, you're probably not inspired by the weather in Scotland, so I have a house in Italy and you can stay there for 4 weeks so you can get inspired again, and then hopefully you'll have at least started a book by the end of the summer. So she takes her up on the offer, but when she gets there, she finds that the house is already occupied by a hot Italian guy and his son. It turns out this Claudio is his name. He's the agent's ex-husband, and the son is their son. He doesn't want her to leave, so he tells her that she can stay and hopefully she can write the book. But of course, they're gonna fall in love. Okay, let me think. Okay, so I read this book while I was in Italy. So if you want more of my in-depth thoughts, check out that vlog. But first of all, I felt like she read very young and he was a sucky father, and that was my main problem. I felt like the son was used as a plot device and like a cardboard cutout that was slid into the story whenever it was convenient. So the only reason the agent would still have access to his family home is because they share a son, because otherwise it's just an ex of his, and why would she still have access to the house, you know what I mean? And the son was also used as a plot device to keep them apart, because at one point he's like, my dad cannot have love or something like that. So Claudio never spent any real time with his son, even though they were like, the reason they were not supposed to be there for 4 weeks was because he was supposed to be on vacation with his son. But since his son's friend broke his leg, they had to come back home. And the whole time he spent doing 3 things: either eating with Grace, or working on his sculptures, or fucking Grace. Those were the only 3 things he was doing. And you know what he was not doing? Spending time with his son. So then in that case, he just becomes unlikable to me, because you're a shitty dad. So why would I care about your romance? You know what I mean? And the writing style in this book just kind of bothered me. I think I go a little bit in depth in that Italy vlog, where I actually read you some of the lines, but I was like, I don't know, I never really could get into the story. I always felt like she was talking to the reader, but then other times it wasn't. I don't know. Like at the end of the day, I just didn't care about these 2. I thought they were annoying, and I thought he was a shitty dad. The only reason I would read a single dad romance is if he's a good dad, because why would I care? Like, just because he actually has a kid doesn't make him a good dad. You know what I mean? So no, he was just, I didn't like it at all. What I did like, however, was, since I was in Italy at the time of reading it, I did think she did a good job with describing the places they visited, describing the food and the drinks. So that was nice. But other than that, no, I didn't like it. A book I also vlogged was The Courting of Bristol Keats. So I've been talking about this book a lot lately, so I'm just gonna really quickly talk about this one. So this is Mary E. Pearson's first like romantasy, which she wrote the Remnant Chronicles. That series is still one of my favorite series, so it's nothing against her as an author. This book just did not work for me at all. So you follow Bristol, who recently lost both her parents, and she lives in the human world. She always assumed she was human. She always assumed her parents were humans, until one day she gets a mysterious letter from a aunt she's never heard of, telling her to meet her. And when she meets the aunt, she realizes that there's this whole other Fey realm and her parents are really from there. And then after that, she discovers that her father might not be dead. So she agrees to go to this Fey realm to help them. And in exchange, she wants them to find her dad. So she tells all that to the king of one of the Fey realms. This is going to be their romance. Okay, so basically, I had major issues with character development, relationship development, not just between the romantic interests, but also between Bristol and her friends. And also, what's his name? And also Tegan and his friends. And most especially, I had major issues with the writing choices made. Not the writing style, because I still think Mary E. Pearson has a beautiful writing style, and sometimes I found myself mesmerized by some of the lines used. To me, this felt, so this is going to be a duology, and this did not have a good arc of a book. I know a series or duology or trilogy has to have a whole arc in general, but each and every single book has to have a satisfying beginning, middle, and end. And this book didn't have that. It had a somewhat decent beginning and half of a middle, and that's it. To me, it felt like, and the way I explain it in the vlog is, I feel like she wrote the entire story for the duology, and either she or the publisher cut it halfway through, and that's what they decided the first book should be. I don't know if I would have loved it had it been a trilogy, but if it had been a trilogy, I think this could have just worked better. I think she could have spent more time on the relationships and the character development, and the way the first book ends, I felt like that was a perfect scene to have halfway through a second book. And I didn't really believe in this romance, and like I said, there were so many side characters, and that is kind of the most heartbreaking to me, because in the Remnant Chronicles, yes, I loved the romance, but what I loved even more was Leah's relationship with her friends. I felt like Mary E. Pearson wrote those friendships beautifully. She didn't do that in this book. And I think she could have had Bristol had a little bit less friends. So yeah, no, this was 2 stars. Unfortunately, I will not be continuing on, even though I have this beautiful, beautiful edition. In fact, I'm going to be unhauling this, unfortunately. And honestly, like I said, I was really looking forward to this book. So very much disappointed. Next is The Best Man by Sam Mariano. Once again, Untouchable was one of my favorite books I read last year. So I was kind of, I don't know, on the one hand I was disappointed, but on the other hand I really was not, because this was only a novella. Like, comparing it to Bristol Keats, which has over 500 pages, this didn't take that much of my time. I actually also read this for a vlog, which I'll leave linked for you. But this is a smutty book that very much starts off non-consensual, so it's kind of disturbing, and that is not why I gave this book 2 stars, because I knew that going in. It's mainly, so basically this novella basically has 2 parts. So the first part is things I already knew about. I had major issues with the second part. So basically you follow this girl who is engaged, and I believe her wedding is the next day, but she got home from her bachelorette party and it kind of sucked, so she decides to go to her fiance's place and sleep in his bed and try to wait for him to come home. He does, and then his brother, and also the best man, comes into the bedroom and sees her sleeping there, and then he decides to bring in each and every one of his brothers, plus his father, and the only one that's not invited in is the fiance. And he tells her that the fiance always had this fantasy of, you know, having sex with an anonymous girl, and he wants to give him that fantasy on his bachelor party. So she agrees, because she kind of also wants to do that for him. But instead of bringing the fiance, like I said, he brings in all the other brothers plus their father to fuck her, and he also fucks her alongside them. And, you know, definitely non-con and very much brutal at times. And then the second half is them having their happily ever after. So her with the best man. And all of that happens in a day. So in a day, even though she was just basically against her will. I mean, I get at one point, she's like, yeah, but I always had something going on with him. That's fine. But that was kind of traumatizing. But then she decides, you know what? No, I love him. I love the best man. And I'm going to marry the best man now. And it's their happily ever after, and all of that, like even the epilogue is like, I believe only 2 months later. So that's also like the writing choices made. Like I already knew going in that this was going to be unhinged behavior. So I already set my expectations for that, but I didn't know that it could get that unhinged. And I feel like she could have, like, this would have been higher rated had the time span between her having that night and their HA. Okay, so I had a major coughing fit. I don't know what I was saying, but basically I feel like she should have done either 2 things. If she wanted to keep it the same and have them both have this unhinged night, plus have them have an HEA. I know this is just a novella, but you can still write a passage of time in a novella. Like she could have just skipped time a little bit. Plus a novella can be 200 pages. So she could have added 50 more pages and it still would have been a novella. I don't know. I just felt like to have them have that night plus just a day later and that be their romance and then have an epilogue of 2 months later. That to me does not a romance make. Like at the end of the day, I just thought, okay, so these 2 are gonna break up or he's gonna murder her. Like those were like the only 2 options I had at the end of the novella. So I feel like she should have given them more time as a couple, and not necessarily like she could do that with more pages, but also through the passage of time. Or they should have not been an erotic romance. It should have just been an erotica and just given us that one night and then end scene and good luck. You can figure out how they're gonna end up together. But the way this was, like, at the end of the day, this to me is just, it read like a start of an abusive relationship. And technically it didn't have to be. Like, if you had given them more time to develop as a couple, I might have believed, like, I mean, I read Untouchable, that also starts off very much non-consensual, yet I still believe in their romance at the end of the day. I don't believe that they have an abusive relationship, whereas with The Best Man, yes, I did feel like that way. Next is Yakuza Lover by, I don't know who writes this, let me see, which I think I vlogged all of these. By Nozomi Mino. Okay, so this also feels like it was too quick. So this is a series of, let me see how many volumes. So this is a manga, but so far it has like 12 volumes. Yet in this volume, she meets the Yakuza, she falls in love with the Yakuza, he falls in love with her, they profess their undying love for each other, and they even go on vacation, I'm pretty sure. So now what's the point of this having to be a series? You know, I just, like, once again, I just didn't believe in that romance. All of it went too quickly. It was very much a case of insta love. And like I said, you can have that, but with a manga, you have the time to, like, there was not a bit of angst, not at all. Like, you have the time to develop this romantic relationship over time. You don't need to cram it all in the first volume. Plus, this made me have no interest in reading the rest of the volumes, because that, like, what is that going to be about? You know, it's just going to be them fighting probably and her being in danger, and I just didn't care. I think out of all of them, this one I'm the least mad at, because it was a quick read and it was entertaining, but really I couldn't give it any higher than 2 stars. It didn't take up much of my time. Like, I think I read it in an hour, but it was just also not good. So there's that. And the last book I actually finished is The Rom-Commers by Catherine Center. This one I read for the Goodreads Choice Awards last month. And this book, you follow Emma and Charlie. And Charlie is a famous Hollywood screenwriter, and Emma has always been a big fan of his. And she wants to be a screenwriter, but she had to kind of keep her dreams on pause to take care of her sick father. And then her ex-boyfriend, who's also her manager, tells her that he has a job for her because Charlie has to write this screenplay, this rom-com, and he sucks at it and he wants her help. She reluctantly agrees because technically she doesn't want to, because she doesn't trust her sister to take care of their dad. But she does, and there she meets Charlie, who's a giant douchebag to her. He doesn't want help with his rom-com because apparently with screenplays, like, if somebody commissions a screenplay, you can write it good enough for them to actually like it, but then just because you wrote a screenplay doesn't actually make it a movie. So his plan is to kind of toe the line, to be good enough for the person requesting the screenplay, but not good enough to actually become a movie. Emma overhears that, and she wants to put her heart and soul into this because this could be her big break. Eventually, she convinces him that they should work together, and working together means she has to live with him for romance reasons, and it's their romance. I thought Charlie was a giant douchebag. I hated him. I thought he was very unlikable, and I just thought Emma was a giant pushover because she constantly kept forgiving him, and I didn't understand why. Like, I say this in my wrap-up, like, I like a pining heroine, but this was not pining, this was pathetic. And at one point I was like, girl, pick your dignity off the floor and leave. Like, the amount of times he was not nice to her, and then she constantly was like, okay, he might not be nice and I might hate him, but I can still do this and this and this for him. And also, for like the majority of the book, I didn't really have any issues with Emma. But towards the end, I also kind of despised her because she was so bitchy to her sister. And then once her sister says something very similar to Emma, she just gets on her high horse and is like, how dare she? It's like, you literally 2 seconds ago said the exact same thing. Like, why are you all of a sudden so offended? So I didn't like these two. And honestly, it was not that big a hardship to read because it was a little bit over 300 pages, but I would not recommend this book, and these characters were unlikable. Now for the books I DNF'd. I'm not gonna go too in-depth about these books because I did not finish them. The first one is Magnolia Parks. This book, I really cannot fault it because I knew I shouldn't have picked it up because I know this is not my book. It is just not. Because this is about rich socialites with a lot of angst. And those are just two things I don't really like. Magnolia and BJ used to be together until he cheated on her, but now they still sleep in the same bed, but she uses other men to make him jealous and he constantly sleeps around. Like, I don't give a fuck. Like, I don't. And like I said, I knew this was not for me and I never really had any intention of reading it. But beginning of the year, I did a reading BookTube's most popular books of 2023 or most popular romances. And this one was very popular. So, but I think I gave it like 20 pages and then gave up on it. So really, I'm not mad at this book because it was always very clear what this was about and it was always very clear to me that it was not for me. Hyperbole and a Half. This one I was reading because I wanted to read some books off of my TBR and I could not get into it. I don't really remember why that is. I didn't like it. I didn't like the drawings. I couldn't really relate to this book. And I do feel like I just read it way too late. Like this was published in 2013. So 11 years ago, and maybe if I had read it then, I would have liked it, but I didn't find it funny either. I just cut my losses and moved on. An Island Princess Starts a Scandal. This one I also read for a vlog. I don't really remember why I DNF'd it. Let me actually watch that vlog real quickly and I'll give you my thoughts. It makes me sad because this was a historical romance, female-female relationship, which obviously I want to read more of those diverse romances. So it sucks, but basically this was just not for me because I felt like I honestly had issues with the writing style in that she used so many big, difficult words that I didn't understand that I had to look up, which took me out of the story constantly. And obviously English is not my first language, but I have read hundreds of books and that rarely happens to me. So the fact that it kept happening made me not really enjoy this book. Plus the romance, even though I had only read 75 pages, I wasn't getting these heart flutters, heart palpitations. I don't know. I knew continuing it would probably mean I would give it 2 stars, and I also didn't really want to do that. So out of all of them, I would say with this one, if you're interested in it, pick it up because a lot of people do love it. It's just for me and I guess my vocabulary and kind of books I tend to love, this was not for me. Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. This is kind of embarrassing, but I got to page, I don't remember, but I got pretty far in and I really tried. I listened to the audiobook alongside it. I did everything in my power for this book to work for me and it just didn't. I think a big part of me not appreciating this book is like half of this book was about her childhood and I don't care. Like I'm here for the romance. I'm here for her and Mr. Rochester and their romance. I felt like it was a little bit too long. I just didn't care. Maybe I should watch the movie first and then read this book because this is a lot of people's favorite classics. In fact, I thought it was going to be mine. Like I have like 3 or 4 editions of Jane Eyre because I just assumed it was going to be my favorite classic and it just didn't work. And I cannot, like I said, it has been a while, so I cannot really tell you my reasoning. For me, it just felt like this was a very big chore to read it, so I just cut my losses. I do have to say, it's not like I cannot enjoy classics. Obviously, it's not my most read genre, but Little Women is one of my favorite books of all time. I've loved Pride and Prejudice. I don't know, I feel like maybe in another time I might enjoy this a little bit more, but for now, I didn't want to, once again, I didn't want to give this book a very low rating, so I just DNF'd it. Lore of the Wilds by Annalise Sobrana. I got pretty far in, honestly. I got to page 224 and this book had like 334, so I only needed to read the last 100 pages. So I got pretty far in. This is the beautiful cover. I think it's gorgeous. So once again, I checked my wrap up for when I read this book. I had issues with the writing choices made. I felt like she focused way too much time on things that didn't matter, in my opinion, and way too little time on things that did matter. Also, this had a major case of insta-love, and insta-love could be fine, except this hero was willing to sacrifice everything for her when it was never really explained to me why that was the case. And this is apparently going to be a love triangle, yet at the point where I was at, 2/3 of the way through, the second love interest was not even really introduced. So then why should I care about that? There were obviously some things I did appreciate. Like I like the fact that she obviously now, okay, so this is about a human girl going into a fae world that's funny. Maybe I have issues with those kinds of like portal fantasies, I guess, because it reminds me of Bristol Keats, obviously, but because they need her for something, like she needs to enter a library that only humans can enter. and she falls in love with like the guard. One of the things I appreciate is these are obviously all black characters. I liked how usually in these books where a human from our world gets like transported into a fantasy realm, we never really spend time explaining how they shave or how they like take care of themselves hygienically. Whereas in this book, the fact that she didn't have her hair products was a thing that she was struggling with, and they needed to figure out a way to help her. So I did enjoy that. So halfway through, I realized I wasn't enjoying it. So sometimes so if that happens, sometimes I read reviews to see if the lower review, like the 2 and 3 stars, or 1, 2, or 3 stars, are things that I agree with. And if that's the case, I look at those reviews to see if it does get better. And in this case, those reviews were very scathing, and I agreed with almost every single point. And at that point, I saw that it already had a very low average rating, and I knew that if I was going to finish it, it was not going to get any higher than a 2-star, and I didn't really want to add to that since this is a diverse read. So I just cut my losses and DNF'd. And the last book I want to talk about that I DNF'd is Lies and Weddings by Kevin Kwan. This, once again, just like Magnolia Parks, is a book that I would never really pick up on my own. It's about these rich people and their rich problems. This to me doesn't feel like, nothing in the synopsis makes me think this is a romance. And the only reason I picked it up is for the Goodreads Choice Award. So I gave it about 60 or 70 pages until I just cut my losses and DNF'd. So I don't really know a whole lot about this book. It does say a thrilling plotted story of love, money, murder, sex, and the lies we tell about them all. You follow this family, the Greshams, and I believe their son has to marry this heiress, since even though they are from the aristocracy, they don't have any funds left. So, like I said, this is not for me, so I DNF'd. So these are my worst books I read in 2024, and also the books I DNF'd in 2024. Definitely let me know in the comments below if you've read any of these books and what your thoughts were. Also, I would really love to know what are your worst books you read this year, or the books you DNF'd. Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below. And I really hope you enjoyed this video. Definitely let me know by leaving a like if you did, and thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.